Bill Maher leaned back in his chair, expecting a laugh. Just another late-night jab at a politician he thought he could out-talk. But when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett responded, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. In a room built for sarcasm, she brought silence. In a culture addicted to clapbacks, she delivered clarity. And by the time she uttered the words, "I'm not being small," even Maher's audience knew something historic had just happened. This wasn't a meltdown, it was a masterclass in how real leadership holds its ground without ever needing to shout. The dressing room at CBS Television City in Los Angeles was spotless. Too spotless. Like a place scrubbed so thoroughly and so often, it had forgotten that people actually sat there, nervous or not, wondering what came next. Jasmine Crockett sat still. Her elbows rested lightly on the padded chair arms, the dull glow of her phone screen reflecting in her eyes, even though she hadn't touched it in minutes. The air felt sterile, but not just from cleaning supplies, it was the silence. An unfamiliar kind of silence, the kind that whispers, "You're not welcome," without ever saying a word. Earlier, a young production assistant had knocked once, then opened the door gently, careful not to make too much eye contact. "Congresswoman Crockett, just a heads up, you're on in 10. Then, just like that, she was gone. Jasmine didn't answer. She just blinked once, exhaled slowly, and let the weight of the next few minutes settle in her chest. She'd done this before, many times, cable news hits, panel debates, even hostile interviews. But something tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way no one met her eyes when she entered the building. Maybe it was the way the laughter behind the green room curtain fell quiet the moment she stepped in. Maybe it was the phone call 2 days earlier from her comms director. "The invite says it's a discussion on polarization and civility," he'd said. "But you know how that goes. They're not bringing you on to discuss. They're baiting you." She'd nodded quietly on that call, even though he couldn't see her. She knew. She always knew. Because this wasn't just another media appearance. This was Real Time with Bill Maher. A show infamous for cutting humor and subtle jabs, especially toward people who spoke too earnestly, especially toward people who looked like her. And now, with America more divided than ever, with midterms behind them and 2024 on the horizon, Jasmine Crockett, freshman congresswoman, unapologetic Texan, and a rising star with a sharp tongue and sharper mind, was the night's featured guest. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, adjusted her blazer, light powder blue, no jewelry except for a silver watch. She didn't believe in armor, not the kind you could see. Her armor was her calm, her voice, her preparation. And tonight, she was covered head to toe in it. As she walked down the hallway toward the set, she passed portraits on the wall, Johnny Carson, George Carlin, Robin Williams, all black and white, all male. Icons of comedy, icons of commentary, icons who never had to lower their voice just to be heard, never had to brace themselves for the label angry every time they raised a valid point. And there, right at the end of the hallway, stood Reese, her assistant, still in his 20s, always nervous when Jasmine was this quiet. "You good?" he asked, not expecting a real answer. Well, she nodded once. "Let's go." The lights on set were already warming up. The audience laughter had that unmistakable studio echo. Real, but coached. A warm-up comic had just finished. Maher was seated, flipping casually through his blue cue cards, making notes, smirking like someone who already thought he knew how the conversation would go. He barely looked up when she walked in, just gestured to the seat next to him like he was offering a favor. The cameras panned slowly. The theme song began. Applause sign blinked. The moment had arrived. Jasmine gave one last glance toward the studio monitor. She saw herself on screen, composed, focused. But what she really saw wasn't herself. It was every woman who had ever walked into a room where the rules were never quite written down, but somehow always used against you. Cut to Maher. Our next guest tonight is a rising Democratic congresswoman from Texas. She's young, sharp, and possibly the future of her party, assuming emotion doesn't get in the way. Polite chuckles. Not laughter, not applause, just that kind of performative giggle that fills space when people aren't sure whether to laugh or cringe. Jasmine smiled politely. Nothing big, nothing forced. "Good to be here," she said, voice even. Maher leaned in, already playing the role of smirking skeptic. "Let's start simple," he said. Why do so many progressives these days feel the need to moralize everything? You know, every issue becomes a sermon. Jasmine tilted her head, just slightly. It was the kind of movement that said, I've been expecting this exact question for days. She didn't react with surprise. She didn't let the air shift. Instead, she leaned forward, not aggressively, just enough to own the space between them. Moralize, she said, voice light. Or do you mean stand up for people who've been told to wait their turn since 1964? The audience laughed, not forced this time. Something real stirred. A few heads nodded. Maher blinked, then recovered. Right. But don't you think passion sometimes gets in the way of policy? There's a lot of yelling these days, not a lot of progress. Feels like everyone's trying to go viral instead of get things done. Another soft laugh from the audience. This time, Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't lean in. She simply sat back, crossed her legs, and replied, You know what I get called when I speak up about injustice? Maher raised an eyebrow. Emotional, angry, dramatic, depending on the day. Meanwhile, I've seen men on this very show rant, shout, curse, and they get labeled passionate. Conviction. She looked at him, not confrontational, just direct. Interesting, isn't it? The audience went quiet, not uncomfortable, just listening. For years, Maher had gotten away with this rhythm. Poke, dismiss, joke, move on. But tonight, something was different. Jasmine wasn't pushing back. She wasn't playing defense. She was just refusing to be cornered. And somehow, that was more disruptive than any raised voice could have been. Reese watched from backstage, gripping his notepad tight, his knuckles white. He whispered to the floor manager next to him. That clip's going viral before the show's even over. The manager nodded. If they don't cut it out. Back on stage, Jasmine continued, voice steady. People like to act like policy and emotion are enemies. But I'll tell you what's really getting in the way of progress. It's not passion, it's comfort. People get so comfortable in the way things have been done, they treat new voices like noise. Bill Maher crossed one leg over the other, that old defensive posture, that familiar smirk fading just a little. He tried again, quieter this time. Okay, so how do we move forward then? What's the alternative? Jasmine leaned back, looked around the room. Start by listening, then stop pretending discomfort is the same as disrespect. Silence. The good kind. The kind that makes an audience sit forward. The kind that even Maher couldn't interrupt. And that was just the beginning. It was one of those moments where the room shifts, and everyone feels it before they know why. Maher had tossed out his first jab, casual and expected, the way he always did. But Jasmine's response didn't match his rhythm. She didn't get defensive. She didn't try to charm him or the audience. She just answered plainly, and in doing so, took control of the tempo. Bill Maher, usually sharp and fast with a rebuttal, blinked longer than usual. His fingers tapped the edge of his cue cards, not nervous, not rattled, but adjusting. Because he'd expected a politician, but what he got was something harder to sideline, someone whose stillness carried more power than outrage. So let me ask you this, Congresswoman, he said, shifting slightly in his seat, trying to find his groove again. Do you think the left is losing the country by focusing too much on identity and not enough on results? The audience stirred. This was one of those statements that always got a reaction, and Maher knew it. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She crossed one leg over the other, placed her hands on her knee, and looked directly at him. I think what's losing people, she said calmly, is the idea that you can separate someone's identity from the impact of policy. You want results? Great. Let's talk about how policy hits differently when you're poor, when you're black, when you're rural, when you're undocumented, when you're invisible until election season. The air shifted again. The crowd, half expecting a battle of soundbites, found themselves pulled into something deeper. Because here's the truth, she continued. For years, politics was designed to feel neutral, but it wasn't. It just centered one kind of experience. So now that different voices are demanding space, people say, why is everything about race or gender? She paused. Let the words hang. Because it always was. You just weren't listening. A few claps broke through, then a louder one, then applause. Maher gave a tight smile, tapping his pen now. This wasn't the usual pacing, and it showed. I get it, he said, still smiling. But don't you think voters are exhausted? Tired of being told they're privileged when they're struggling too? A guy making $42,000 in Ohio doesn't feel powerful just because he's white. Jasmine nodded. You're right. Struggle is struggle. But here's the thing. That same man in Ohio might be struggling. But he still gets treated with dignity at traffic stops. He still sees faces like his on the evening news that aren't followed by the word suspect or shot and killed. That doesn't make him the villain, but ignoring that disparity doesn't make it go away. Maher leaned back slightly. So what? You want every conversation to come with a race disclaimer? No, Jasmine said. I want the conversation to come with truth. There it was again. That hush, not discomfort, gravity. The sense that someone had just spoken something so plain, it didn't need to be dramatic to land like a punch. Backstage, Reese had stopped pretending not to be glued to the monitor. His phone buzzed every few seconds. Texts from colleagues, old college friends, even a national strategist. She's eating him alive, but classy. On stage, Maher shifted to policy. Okay then, let's move to something concrete. What has the left actually accomplished lately? Beyond rhetoric? Jasmine didn't hesitate. You want receipts? Let's go. She ticked them off with measured control. Passed the Inflation Reduction Act, delivered billions in infrastructure investments, protected Medicare drug pricing, extended the child tax credit. We're working on capping insulin prices. And I've personally authored legislation to strengthen voter access for working people and the disabled. She paused. But here's the catch. For every bill we push, we get told we're overreaching, too progressive, too bold. And yet, when the results come through, everyone celebrates. Maher shrugged. That's politics. No, she replied. That's hypocrisy. More applause, not wild, but steady. Older viewers in the audience, gray-haired men and women who hadn't clapped at anything yet, nodded in quiet approval. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't gesturing wildly. She was doing something even more dangerous to the old political guard. She was making sense. Bill Maher, now feeling his authority threatened, leaned back again. He reached for the familiar. Sarcasm. Well, Congresswoman, you sure know how to deliver a monologue. Maybe there's a Netflix special in your future. Jasmine smiled. I'll stick to writing laws, but I appreciate the offer. That one drew real laughs, but Jasmine wasn't there to be charming. She turned back to Maher, and now her voice softened. Look, I didn't come here tonight to perform. I came because I'm tired of seeing real concerns turned into punchlines. I know what it's like to sit across from someone who sees your experience as exaggerated, who thinks being calm makes you safe and being loud makes you dangerous. But I also know something else. She looked to the camera. There are people watching this right now who've been told they're too angry, too emotional, too much, and they've started to believe that maybe they should just sit down and be quiet. A pause. Well, I'm here to say, don't. Silence. Complete stillness. Then a slow, growing round of applause. The kind that builds, not because someone is signaling it, but because people feel it in their gut. Maher, now visibly thrown, tried to find his next line. He shuffled his cards, glanced at the teleprompter. He had underestimated her, and the country was watching. By now, the live audience had changed. Not outwardly, they still sat, arms folded, expressions attentive. But something had shifted. They weren't just here for entertainment anymore. They were listening like it mattered, and it did. Maher, catching the change, leaned into his next line with a bit more calculation. Less smirk, more defense. You've made your case, but don't you think some of this outrage culture you're describing, it's not coming from people like me. It's coming from your own side. Censorship, canceling, demanding apologies for tweets from 10 years ago. You've got college kids trying to shut down comedy shows because they heard a joke they didn't like. That doesn't sound like truth-telling to me. That sounds like policing thought. There it was, a pivot, one Maher had used countless times, position himself as the middle, the adult in the room, the real liberal, while portraying everyone younger, louder, or different as extreme. Jasmine didn't flinch. She nodded slowly, like someone flipping through a file cabinet in her mind. When she responded, her voice wasn't defensive. It was surgical. I've spent my career defending the Constitution, Mr. Mayor. I know the First Amendment better than most, and I'll tell you what it protects. Your right to say almost anything. What it doesn't protect is your right to say it without consequence. Murmurs in the crowd. Some nods. A few still, silent faces. And let's be clear, she continued, the outrage you're talking about, it didn't start on college campuses. It didn't start with TikTok or social justice hashtags. It started with people finally realizing that being polite hadn't changed anything. She leaned in, but just slightly, enough to let the words drop heavier. They protested, they organized, they demanded better, and because that made people uncomfortable, the reaction was to call them sensitive. Cancel culture. Maher opened his mouth, but Jasmine raised a hand, not to cut him off, but to hold space. I'm not here to defend every tweet or protest sign, but I am here to say that demanding accountability isn't censorship. It's a democratic response to power. The studio stilled, and then, from the back, someone clapped. A single clap, then two, then a few more. Maher smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. So, no regrets then? No concerns about how extreme the rhetoric's gotten? Jasmine leaned back. You want to talk extremes? She asked. He nodded. All right, here's an extreme. Children doing active shooter drills in schools, while lawmakers debate whether doors are the problem. Women losing the right to control their own bodies in states where they can't even get prenatal care. Seniors rationing insulin because the cost of staying alive has become a luxury. That's extreme. And yet, somehow, the people who protest those things are the ones you're calling hysterical? A pause. That's not logic. That's gaslighting. The audience burst into applause. Reese, backstage, ran a hand over his face. Lord have mercy, he whispered. On set, Maher chuckled, deflecting. Okay, let's all breathe, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. You've clearly got the crowd tonight. Jasmine smiled, just barely. This isn't about the crowd, Bill. It's about the people who never get a seat in rooms like this. Maher tried to move on. All right, let's shift to crime. Big issue. Democrats are struggling with messaging on it. Polls say people feel less safe. What's the answer? This time, Jasmine didn't soften. First, let's separate feelings from facts. Crime is down in many major cities, but you wouldn't know it if you only watched fear-based media. Second, let's be honest. When people say they don't feel safe, we need to ask, who are they afraid of? And why? Maher raised an eyebrow. Are you saying fear isn't valid? No, she said. I'm saying fear is powerful, and it's been used for decades to justify policies that punish poverty instead of addressing it. She didn't blink. When I was a public defender, I saw it firsthand. People jailed because they couldn't afford bail. Kids criminalized for skipping school because they had to work. Mothers losing custody over utility bills. That's what the justice system looks like when fear runs it. A long, quiet pause. Then Maher, still searching for the upper hand, reached for the familiar once more. Well, I gotta say, Congresswoman, you have a real gift for the courtroom. You ever think about stand-up? It was a joke, but it didn't land because Jasmine didn't laugh. She waited. Then, very simply, answered, I prefer standing up in rooms where people's lives are on the line. Silence, not tension, respect. The audience, older viewers especially, sat straighter. This wasn't just another segment anymore. It was a redefinition of what leadership looked like, what presence looked like, and Maher knew it. He shuffled his papers again, trying to regroup. He had more segments to get through, but the moment had shifted. And everyone watching, from home, from backstage, from corners of America where voices like Jasmine's were too often drowned out, felt it. Something rare had happened. Someone had walked into a room designed to undermine her, and without raising her voice, had changed the entire tone. And they weren't done yet. There's a moment in every confrontation when it's no longer about words, it's about presence. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just winning a debate. She was reclaiming a stage that wasn't built for her, and Maher knew it. But so did the audience, especially the older ones, the veterans of the civil rights era, the women who remembered being called too emotional in boardrooms, the grandfathers who'd taught their granddaughters to hold their heads high in rooms that underestimated them. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She let her restraint say everything. Maher cleared his throat. So, if I may ask, he began, attempting to regain footing, do you think some of this tension between generations, ideologies, whatever, it's just a communication issue, a lack of shared language? Jasmine considered that. It's not a lack of shared language, Bill, she replied. It's a lack of shared experience. And when people won't do the work of listening, they call what they don't understand radical. Maher nodded cautiously. Okay, but surely you understand that to many Americans, some of the rhetoric from the left feels confrontational. Doesn't that push people away? Jasmine exhaled slowly. Her gaze never wavered. You know what's more confrontational than rhetoric? She asked. Watching your neighborhood flood every 5 years and being told climate change is a hoax. Having your pain politicized every election cycle, then ignored every time the cameras leave. Or waking up in a state where your rights disappear overnight and being told to calm down so you don't scare voters. The studio went silent again. The sound engineers stopped adjusting faders. The cameraman steadied the shot. Jasmine leaned in. People aren't angry because they want to be. They're angry because they've been polite and unheard for far too long. Maher tried to lighten the mood. Well, I hope you don't take it personally if people disagree with you. She smiled faintly. Disagreement is part of democracy, but erasing context? That's not disagreement. That's gaslighting. Reese, backstage, checked his watch. The clip was already being sliced, captioned, and posted. Meanwhile, the audience stayed fixed on Jasmine. Let me ask you something, Bill, she continued. When was the last time you were told to lower your voice so people wouldn't feel threatened? Maher blinked. Exactly, she said. See? That's the difference. I'm expected to soften my delivery. Not because what I'm saying is wrong, but because it makes the status quo uncomfortable. Another murmur from the audience. A few people clapped again. The tension wasn't just rising, it was resonating. Maher turned slightly in his seat. Well, I mean, surely we can agree that civility has to matter, right? We can't solve our problems by shouting at each other. Jasmine didn't flinch. Civility matters, she said, but so does truth. And too often, civility is used as a shield for power to deflect accountability. You want calm? Let's start by creating equity. You want peace? Start by delivering justice. The claps came again, steadier, stronger. Maher's producer made a subtle gesture from the side. Wrap it soon. Bill saw it. He adjusted his posture. Congresswoman Crockett, he said, you've definitely left a mark tonight. Final thoughts? Jasmine looked directly at the camera. To the folks watching this from home, she said, especially those who've been told they're too loud, too sensitive, too angry, this is your reminder. You're not too much. You've been told to shrink so others could stay comfortable, but the truth doesn't require apology. She paused. I'm not here to be palatable. I'm here to be principled. And then she sat back. No smile, no wink, just a woman who had said what she came to say. The crowd rose. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to let the world know that something had happened on that stage. And Maher? He smiled politely, but for the first time in a long time, he was the one without the last word. The segment ended, but the conversation was just beginning. The show ended, but the energy in the studio didn't die down. It shifted. Jasmine walked backstage with calm, practiced steps. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't smug. She was steady, like someone who knew that the real impact of a moment isn't measured by the applause inside a studio, but by the silence it leaves behind once the camera's cut. Reese met her just past the black curtain, phone in hand, his eyes wide. You should see this, he said. He didn't have to explain. The video clip, just under 2 minutes long, was already up on social media. The caption, I'm not here to be palatable. I'm here to be principled. It was everywhere. By the time Jasmine reached her dressing room, the texts were rolling in. Former law professors, civil rights attorneys, a grandmother from her district in Dallas, a pastor from Mississippi. Her college roommate. Some messages just said, "Thank you." Others read, "You said it for all of us." But there was one text that stood out. It came from an older woman named Joyce, someone Jasmine met during her campaign who'd worked for decades as a nurse in a local hospital. The message read, "I stayed quiet most of my life, baby. You didn't. And that means maybe my granddaughters won't have to either." That was the kind of message you don't respond to with emojis or quick replies. That was the kind you read twice, then once more before you put the phone down. Reese paced the room. "They're gonna say you were too confrontational, that you ambushed him. You know that, right?" Jasmine didn't even look up. "They were always gonna say something," she replied. "The question is whether they heard me before they dismissed me." Outside, the hall buzzed with movement. Maher's staff, production assistants, interns whispering. No one came to say goodbye. And that was fine. She didn't come to be liked. She came to speak. The next morning, the headlines were split down the middle. Some called it the Crockett moment. Others labeled it an on-air dressing down. Cable networks replayed it. Editorials scrambled to frame it. Columnists either praised her poise or accused her of overstepping. But beyond the media swirl, the real story was happening in smaller places. Teachers played the clip for students during civics class. A young woman in Kansas wrote on Instagram, "I've never seen someone talk like that on TV and still keep her dignity." Veterans groups in Michigan passed the clip around in Facebook threads, not with party labels, but with captions like, "This is what backbone looks like." Shetty, in one nursing home in Birmingham, a resident named Earl asked the staff to replay it on the lobby television. "Turn it up," he said. "She's saying something real." By Sunday, Jasmine was invited onto 3 major morning shows. Her staff declined 2. "I don't want to relitigate it," she told Reese. "I want to let it breathe." "But CNN is offering a solo segment," Reese said. She nodded. "That one, but I'll speak on my terms." That Monday, Jasmine appeared on State of the Union. Clean navy blazer, no podium, no notes, just her voice. "Why do you think that segment hit so hard?" the host asked. Jasmine didn't blink. "Because I didn't come with zingers," she said. "I came with something harder to debate, lived experience." Back in her district, Jasmine visited a senior center for a scheduled town hall. She expected 30 people. 75 showed up. Many had walkers, some used canes, some were in wheelchairs, and every single one had seen the clip. A woman in her late 70s stood during the Q&A portion. Her hands trembled just slightly as she gripped the microphone. "Congresswoman," she said, her voice shaking a little, "I raised 5 kids, worked 2 jobs most of my life, and I lost count how many times I was told to be quiet so I wouldn't make things worse." She looked down for a second, then back up. "You made me feel like I wasn't wrong for wanting to be heard." The room applauded. Some wiped their eyes. Jasmine smiled, not broadly, just enough. "That's why I do it," she said, "so we can all feel seen, even when the spotlight isn't kind." And so, as the news cycle moved on, as it always does, the moment didn't fade. It echoed. In schools, in churches, in union halls, in quiet conversations between generations. It showed that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to shrink. And for millions of viewers who saw themselves in her calm, unwavering voice, that was the beginning of something much bigger than a TV moment. It was a standard, a blueprint, a quiet revolution. And now, if you saw yourself in this story, if you've ever been asked to lower your voice to keep others comfortable, this is your reminder. You don't have to be small to be strong. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to apologize for speaking truth. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but speak to who we are and who we're becoming.